next we have David Miller, the Chief Maintenance Engineer for the Louisiana DOT.
I'm going to talk real quickly about our Louisiana Historic Bridge Program, which really we kicked off almost 10 years ago. I'll give you a little bit of background about our state and our bridges. We have about 13,000 bridges in the state, which is pretty normal, except when you consider we've got 18 of the 20 longest bridges in the country in our state, so that puts us at about 176 million square foot of deck area, which is about third in the country. So we have a lot of that, a lot of bridge deck, not necessarily a lot of bridges, but some long ones. We also have a lot of movable bridges, the most in the country, which is going to play into what I'll talk about here today. So we started this effort for Louisiana Historic Bridge Programmatic Agreement around 2011, 2012. So this is the picture here is a picture of our couple program managers that were with Mead and Hunt, Amy Squitori and Christina Slatterly. They did a fantastic job helping us put together our program. And I'll say this out the gate. If you don't have cooperation with your SHPO and your FHWA, you will not pull this off. I don't know how many states have these kind of agreements, but that was critical. They were at the table the whole time. We were working on this, and we all came to agreement on decisions that needed to be made, and that's a critical piece of it. What is the purpose and benefit of it all? Well, ultimately, you'll see through what I'm presenting that it allowed us to, because we had almost 4,600 bridges that were eligible to be historic, that they were 50 years and older. What this agreement allowed us to do was to comply with the federal regulations, identify the bridges that could be on the register, figure out which ones are good candidates. We didn't just, you'll see later, we had a methodology we used to select the bridges that ultimately ended up being top priority. And then ultimately, it streamlined our ability to do work on our structure. This is kind of the project steps we went through. Did a historic context study in 2012. We organized and analyzed all the bridges also in that time frame. We did field studies. We evaluated the register. Really the most important step is that fourth one there where we identified bridges preservation potential. And we had a methodology in doing that, and ultimately in 2015 we executed and signed the agreement with all parties. So it's been in effect now for about 6 years. So as I said earlier, we have almost 4,600 bridges that were pre-1971, I'll call it, since this started in 2012. We looked at 2011 going back 50 years. Ultimately, we ended up only having to deal with about 3% of them because of this agreement. And so that's a huge difference between having to go deal with your 106 issues on 4,600 bridges as opposed to approximately a little under 150 is what it turned out to be. What we did, part of the methodology was to figure out, okay, what are all the different bridge types out there? And basically, in a nutshell, what we're going to do is we're going to select one bridge in each type that's going to be maintained in really good condition in perpetuity. That's the crux of the agreement. And all of the others can be worked on, rehabbed, or replaced. There is a commitment on the department's side to fund and have those bridges as a top priority. One of the next steps was to identify the preservation priority bridges and develop a methodology and then to categorize those bridges. And what the three categories that we came up with was a preservation priority. Those are the most critical bridges in our agreement. They cannot be replaced. They have to be preserved and kept in good condition. And then the preservation candidates are the next tier, which you can do major rehab on those, and then the non-priorities can be fully replaced when needed. And I'll say that with one exception: unless you have a hurricane and some barges get loose and take out one of your bridges, then puts it in the water. That changes the game a little bit. And that happened in August. So this is sort of an overview of what we went through, and I'll get into details. I know that slide is probably impossible to read from where you are. This is, we use basically some of the NBI data to create 5 categories that went into a formula that helped us grade our bridges. Basically, we gave them a condition score, and it could be anywhere from 0 all the way up to 93, I think was the total. And no, it doesn't have to add up to 100, okay, to go up to 93. Engineers generally understand that, but try and explain that to other people. It doesn't always work. So here's the NBI items that we used in creating these 5 different factors that I'll talk about in more detail. It's a comparative tool. It allows us to use good data that already exists, and it indicates their preservation potential and isolates factors that could create problems. We sorted condition scores from high to low. And this is how we selected the bridges that would be in our top priority. So those NBI factors go into these 5 different items that make up the condition score. The rehabilitation is the first one. It's basically, is it in good condition, or can we do some sort of rehab to get it in good condition to where it would be a good candidate? Geometrics, what do the geometrics look like on the bridge? Does it meet current standards? A lot of them don't, but some did, but that was a factor. So we applied the AASHTO standards. It's just noted here that for low ADTs, we did use the minimum guidelines that are allowable. The load capacity of the bridge. Could it maintain 90% of the acceptable load capacity? Detour, how long is the detour? Our criteria was that it needed to be less than 10 miles, and then navigational control and restrictions was the last one. So I'll go through each of these items in a little bit more detail. So rehab, again, this is one of the bridges it's currently being rehabbed. So by the time this rehab project is done, it would be a good candidate for being a preservation priority. This is ultimately one of the bridges that ended up on there. The other question is, if it's not in good condition, can it be made in good condition reasonably? The second factor was geometrics, and what sort of geometrics were involved in the bridge, and did it meet current AASHTO conditions? Do I have a 4-lane highway coming up to a 2-lane bridge? The third factor was the load capacity of the bridge. Basically, like I said, can it carry 90% of the AASHTO HS 2044, which would be, you could still have a load posted bridge like this and it qualify, but nothing less than this. No load posting less than this. The fourth condition is the detour. It's pretty simple and straightforward. It's one of the NBI items. Is it less than 10 miles? This one was a little trickier, the navigational control. Of course, a lot of our movable bridges, have navigational controls. Obviously, there's horizontal and vertical clearances. And as long as the bridge met those conditions, they were considered okay. You could have additional controls, such as railroads or other things that could control, which could make rehabilitation not feasible. And so all those things have to be considered. They're all put into a formula, and we rank them from high to low. I will note that the movable bridges, which like I said, we have the most in the country, they made up the largest percentage of bridge types in this program. Ultimately, this was the result of what we landed on and running all of those 4,600 bridges through the formulas with 122. I'll go through an example, a real quick example of each preservation priority, preservation candidate, and then non-priorities. This is a unique movable bridge with the operator house on the top. That's very unique. Most of the time, the operator house is somewhere on the side. If you go too fast, this guy's going to get dizzy. So it needed to, be able to meet the preservation priority. It needed to check all 5 of those boxes. Here's an example of a bridge. It's in lower part of our state, down in Vermilion Parish. It's a lift bridge, and it's one of our preservation priority bridges. It looks rusty there, but it's been rehabbed since then. It was a preservation priority. It's built in '64. Here's some of the data on it. It checked all 5 of the boxes. Conditional score was 66. So our threshold to make the preservation priority list was 40. You had to have a condition score of 40 or greater. Anything less than that wasn't even considered. Preservation candidates, which is the next tier down, these are still bridges that there's very few of these, but these bridges can only be rehabbed. They can't be replaced. They're included in the 122. This is a kind of a unique bridge, pipe or culvert bridge up in the north part of the state. My notes say it's in East Baton Rouge, which is down the south part of the state, and that is not correct. It's up in near Shreveport. I don't know if you have any of these, but they last a really long time. So this is a candidate, and it was a bridge that could be rehabilitated. It was in pretty good condition. Here's another example of a candidate. This is a bridge up in the middle part of our state. It's a truss bridge. No activities were really, it didn't check all the boxes. It didn't check the geometrics. So this is why it's a preservation candidate and not a preservation priority. A truss bridge like this, you're not going to go fix the geometrics on it without replacing it. It's still a candidate for rehab, but not for replacement. So non-priority bridge examples, these are bridges that scored 40 or less. These are structures that can be replaced. So out of those 4,600 bridges I referred to earlier, 122 will not be replaced, but the non-priorities is the 4,600 minus the 122. So it allows us to move forward without any significant issues with 106 or any of the other historical federal guidelines. This is just an example of one. It's a bridge down in the lower part of the state, and it's not in good condition. And so if they were in poor condition, obviously they were going to get a lower score on some of those factors. The only box that this one checked was that the detour was short. Everything else didn't work. And it's just an example. What were the benefits of this agreement? Again, we only really are dealing with about 3% of our bridges that we have to handle with kit gloves. Part of what's in the agreement is each of those bridges that's listed as a preservation priority or candidate has its own maintenance and preservation plan that's in the agreement, and it basically spells out what can and can't be done to the bridge. And I kind of flew through that. Like I said, all that works really good until something catastrophic happens. A ship hits one of your bridges, or like during Hurricane Ida of 3 months ago, we had 150 mile an hour winds and 15-foot tidal surge that took out one of our preservation candidate bridges, just put it in the water. Mangled it up pretty good, and it was one of our few bridges that is a one-way in, one-way out. So it created a mess. It created a nice little mess. We ended up doing a bunch of weird things, like putting in a military bridge, barge bridge, and probably could do a whole presentation on just that incident. If there are any questions, I know I'm...
Hey, I'm from Texas, so I'm an interloper like David. I had an opportunity to see an earlier version of this presentation that David did about 6 years ago, and frankly, it seemed a little far-fetched to me that we would convince SHPO and the Historic Commission to buy off on it, but we took this process back, and they were actually very receptive to it. So we did something similar with all of our trusses. And so now in Texas, we got down to a list of about 29 trusses that we promised to maintain for all time, and they'll leave us alone on the others. So I really just kind of wanted to put a plug in. I know how difficult it can be to work with the environmental side and the historic side of people, but I didn't think in Texas they would buy off on it, but they were actually very receptive to this concept.
One of the things that I think y'all did that we did as well was, we committed some federal capital dollars and state dollars to pull this off. In other words, we carved out part of our budget to do preservation activities for these structures. And so they saw that there was a commitment there. And I think that helped from day one.
Thank you, David. That was great. Awesome job. And I think everyone can head to lunch.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.